Hello, everyone. My name is Edward Tse. I'm with Gao Feng Advisory Company. We are a strategy and management consulting firm with roots in China. Today, in this dialogue, I'm very delighted to have a guest and a good friend of mine and ex-partner at Booz Allen Hamilton, Ron Haddock, to join us as the guest on this show. Hi, Ron.
Hi, Ed. Good to see you, and thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, nice to see you again too. Ron, we worked together at Booz Allen, or later it was rebranded as Booz and Company, and you came over to help to rebuild the China practice of Booz around 2003, and we had a real good run with building the practice for the firm. But before we talk about all that kind of experiences, Ron, you came with very distinguished pedigrees. You were a graduate of the West Point Academy, and later you went to Harvard Business School and get an MBA. And after the MBA, you joined Booz Allen Hamilton in the US. That was very distinguished pedigree. And perhaps you can describe more about your background, who you are, how do you come from where you were and ended up with consulting and later on in your career.
Sure. Thank you, Ed. So I began my life as an officer in the U.S. Army, and what I learned through that was the importance of kind of purpose and mission. And at some point early in my career, I took an interest in the whole domain of economics and business management. And coming out of my MBA studies, I have to say I developed a passion for this idea of strategy, which I knew to be important in any industry or really in any organizational pursuit, and which is what led me to management consulting. I found it to be an industry that was inspiring in terms of driving curiosity and demanding the ability to think and to reason, ultimately towards pragmatic solutions that could actually work for real organizations. And I found that Booz Allen was a very good platform to do that at the time, and to be able to do that on a global basis, which is what ultimately led the two of us to meet in Shanghai back in over 20 years ago on an initial project that we worked on together when I was still based in India.
That's right. I remember that, Ron. Actually, we were doing a significant project with the Shanghai government. And at that time, China was about to enter WTO. So Shanghai government was very concerned, or they would be very interested in the impact of China's entry into WTO on 4 of the pillar industries. And so I asked around the firm, who could, I recruit to come and help me to be industry experts on these 4 industries. I remember it was banking, insurance, telecom, and automotive. And I got a very strong recommendation that you should be, Ron Haddock should be designated as the expert on auto industry. And there you were. You came over and helped to execute a very successful project and highly impactful for the Shanghai government at that time.
Yeah, and what struck me about that at the time, Ed, was that first of all, that Booz Allen as a firm would take on such topics, and that we would do it in markets where we didn't yet have all that much understanding because we were fairly new to it. Perhaps what was most impressive, though, was the Shanghai government's interest in engaging on a topic about the future of an industry and seeking to find kind of a future view of what the industry could become. And what's really fascinating when I think back about all of the analytical work and the strategic view of envisioning what the China auto market would become, I don't think anyone would have possibly imagined that it would mature and grow as rapidly as it actually has. And it's the remarkable combination of industry working with governments, with the right professional advisors who could kind of envision a path and ultimately, I think, make some recommendations on actions that could catalyze that path forward. really a fascinating experience, but a good example of what can be done between industry and government.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, after that project, Busan decided to take a hiatus in China. And I left the Booz for a couple of years to join the corporate. Then when I was ready to return from corporate to consulting, and Busan asked me to rebuild the China practice. And then you heard about the news and you wrote me. You were in Seoul already in Korea.
I was.
By that time, having transferred from India to Seoul. And you wrote me and you said you were interested in coming to team up. And I said, yeah, that'd be great. And that culminated with our historical meeting in August 2003 at the coffee shop of the Grand Hyatt at the Jimao Tower, which was the highest building in Shanghai at that time. And that historical moment I still remember because, we haven't met for a couple of years, but we felt that there's a lot of mutual interest in wanting to be entrepreneurial, want to rebuild something that we think is worthwhile to rebuild. And that would go, right? That we went. And so, did you recall that whole experience at that time?
Yeah, I do, Ed. And perhaps, and it was actually 99 when I first visited and worked with you on the initial project. And so it was 2003. And so it was 4 years later. And perhaps the biggest surprise to me was how surprised I was at how much had changed in those 4 brief years in China. And of course, the rest is history because that pace never really did slow down. And what was really astonishing was the scope of changes going on across the economy, across industry sectors. The fact that the consulting market itself started to have real traction, and that we were seeing significantly increased demand from our clients and prospective clients for help in navigating where they should potentially play in China. For me personally, it was a career-changing moment. I would tell you that to this day, it was the most formative part of my professional life, certainly in strategy consulting.
Yeah. So we can talk more about your experience in China, but let's take a step back, right? Because if I trace your career, having started with Booz and worked very successfully as a strategy consultant, and later on you joined a number of multinational corporations, and mostly, as I understand, mostly in the capacity of strategy, right? And so your career has been involving mostly, and almost entirely in strategy. And in your own journey, how important you think strategy thinking is for corporations, for people who work in their corporations?
Right, good question, Ed. And when I say strategy, of course, has there's a broad spectrum of what you would classically include in it. It's the upfront visioning where you are, where you could potentially be in an industry, down to the more transformative elements of what you actually have to change in a corporation to actually realize the strategy. So my experience has been across that spectrum. What I found to be true is, regardless of the organization that you're in, whether it's kind of a classic type of industry that I've been in my recent years in multi-industrials, or advising corporations to do it. The same is also true it was true in the military, it's true in government organizations of any kind. It's really all about having and defining a fundamental purpose. Why do you exist? Why do you matter? What is the vision of what you're trying to achieve in a way that you can actually align people behind it? And then strategy, as you know, and as we've worked so many times in the past, is really about, it's a set of choices, right? What are the options that are available to you? What option or options best suit a path forward, knowing that you can't predict the future, but what you're trying to do is anticipate the events that could happen that you could potentially shape. And so strategy as a mindset, or strategy as a skill set, is really important for organizations of any size. And ultimately, it's about, what result did your strategy actually get? And so there's also a piece to that of thinking through what are the actions that you have to take to make a strategy real. I found that personally deeply satisfying. I found that people who invest in acquiring the mindset and acquiring the skills can make a real impact. And that if you want to have a successful company, you better have at least one person who's thinking about that in your company.
Absolutely. And the other dimension is geography, right?
Right.
In your career, you have worked in America, in Asia, including India, Korea, China. Then you also work in Europe, and so from the geographical dimension standpoint, do you see any major differences between the strategy principles across geographies?
A very, very good question, Ed. And it's a question that a lot of people ask because a lot of people are trying to understand in the age of globalization, how applicable are the skills and the mindsets from one market to the other. What I would say is that, first of all, the basic principles never really do change because they're derivative of the basic principle of micro and macroeconomics, and then of human behavior that overlays that and the way that people and companies actually make choices. And ultimately, I think to become a good strategist or a distinguished strategist, it's all down to pattern recognition, right? What are the patterns that I'm seeing? How can I relate those to patterns that I've potentially seen anywhere else? And the patterns help you understand what the issues are. And the second part of that is context, right? The context of any given market or any given geography is going to be unique to that particularly location or geography. And while the contexts are different, what you're looking for are the sources of advantage and the different traditions and regulations that will shape them. So, armed with an understanding of the patterns, armed with the ability to understand context, it allows you to then to start shaping an understanding of the issues as well as the possibilities. And so I think one of the biggest challenges, and you and I have talked about this many times, is that when you take an executive from one geography where they've spent their whole career and you suddenly throw into another one, what they're trying to figure out is what are the patterns. And frequently, if you haven't gone through that a few times before, seen different contexts, there's a tendency sometimes to go with, gut instinct as to what worked in another geography. And it could very well turn out that the context is so different that those analogies just don't apply. And so I would say that's probably one of the biggest pitfalls I've seen in my post-management consulting life is I've worked in companies with people who were very deep in a particular market or geography or function. And some things translate, but not everything does. And just given the stakes, you really don't want to rely just on what you knew worked in geography A when you go to geography B.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, Ron, because as you know, we have so many multinational companies or foreign companies who were interested in coming to China or doubling down the investments in China around the time when you were in China, right, with me. And I say the most common pitfall is for them to really copy and paste what they do from elsewhere and say the same thing would work in China, right? For them, China is just simply another market, whatever, right? And so, do what I did in wherever, and I can be successful. But the reality is not as simple as you said. The context actually make a difference, and the context of China is often so different than the context of some of the Western markets that the difference is so significant that if you just blindly copy and paste a business model or a product, is usually very risky. And that's one of the key reasons why many multinationals when they first came to China, they found China to be so challenging, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And Ed, if you were to look and say, how does that work when you go into countries that are smaller or less complex than China? I would say a lot of multinational executives and companies sometimes could kind of get away with it because the geography or the market was small enough that you could come in and impose, a business model or a solution, and it might work okay because you didn't have all that many competitors of multinationals all crowding into a particular market, and you might not have domestic companies that are competing fiercely. I would say what makes China unique and what exposes the faults in this kind of one-size-fits-all thinking is, first of all, just unprecedented magnitude of the market itself. Right today, on a purchasing power parity basis, China is the biggest or second biggest market in almost any industry. Second is the pace of development, and so the name of the game and what it takes to win is shifting so rapidly that you need a much shorter cycle for your strategies. I would say also kind of this unique combination of state-led versus private sector entrepreneurship, which is a unique blend that has allowed China to create companies both with the state's help as well as without it, that have kind of defied the normal rates of growth that you would see. And then finally, China is such a substantial market in its own right that in many cases it's bigger than the home country market for many multinationals. And as a result of it, the growth prospects and the profit opportunities outweigh the home market. And so it becomes the focus of strategy. And given a lot of the innovation we've actually seen in China, could be the basis of new business models that emerge from China and that actually have applicability and advantages elsewhere in the world. And we've seen that across industries, right? For every major US multinational, you'll find the analog in China. And in some cases, they've been moving faster. And of course, you would expect them to take those models globally as well. So China, the consequences are real. You've got to have a sharper game.
Yeah, we can talk more about China. We can talk about China for hours, right? But maybe I can ask a more fundamental question before we go back to China again, right? So you spend time in doing being a strategy consulting. You spend also a long time being a leader of strategy function in large corporation. What makes you most exciting, about that kind of a role, right? What excites you about that kind of role, or perhaps what's challenging about this kind of role for you?
Yeah, I would say, Ed, the common denominator in this role is taking unstructured opportunities or problem statements and actually putting structure around them. Being able to lead or to participate in formulating problem or opportunity statements that are consequent, right? They're significant because they will ultimately affect the fortunes of either your client as a consultant, or in my case now, the fortunes of my company itself. And so there's an intellectual challenge that stems from curiosity. There's a aspiration for excellence, which is around strong problem-solving skills and the ability to translate that and actually get results and the satisfaction that comes through. I would say what's different about being the advisor versus being in the large corporation is that advisors are usually brought in for kind of a narrower scope. Advisors participate in part of a company's life cycle, but when you're actually an executive in a company, you're there for a much longer duration. There are many touch points that have to be reconciled across different businesses or different functions, and a lot of the softer skills that require development in a company that you might not see as a consultant. Whereas as a consultant, I think there's a deeper focus on analysis than what we would have in the big corporations. The two skill sets are highly complementary. There's a high degree of overlap, and I can only say that both have been equally personally thrilling and rewarding to me.
And in your corporate career, you work across a number of different industries. I recall you worked in the automotive, building technology, materials, chemicals, real estate, and technical services. If you look across this, various industries and and sort of compare and contrast, the different companies approach the strategy.
Mm.
How would you view them?
Yeah, I would say, so first of all, Ed, the one thing that all of these industries have in common is there's a reason why they're important. And it's because they all tie to kind of the modern lives that we live. And without any one of those industries, modern life itself would not be possible. That gives rise to kind of a purpose, right? There's a reason why these companies need to exist and thrive. There are also kind of almost predictable development curves that these various industries go through. And so, as a executive responsible for helping to formulate the strategies and the transformation paths, it's about having a point of view on the future and what you're trying to achieve ultimately for all of your external stakeholders, with a heavy focus on value that you deliver to customers. The range of problems are fairly common. I mean, it's ultimately about growth. It's about the organization's ability to drive that. It's about efficiency and effectiveness. The actual technologies can differ and differ quite significantly. But here too, all of the technologies are derivative of some fundamental underlying natural science. Physics and chemistry are at the root of any of these industries. And so having some understanding of the underlying science and then the technologies that are built on these are common across any industry that you would actually, or that I've actually worked in. And so that's been a lot of my focus, is understanding the basics of what drives an industry, how you actually create value for customers, and then ultimately putting in place the programs that allows, in some case, tens of thousands of people working together to actually, achieve those visions. A very common set of requirements across industries, I found.
I see. But let's come back to China and talk a little bit more about China, given your impact in the China consulting during your time in China, right? I say when you were at Booz, we really took the firm from zero, from nowhere, because we started the whole practice from zero, and to a significant practice, I say at the premium of the whole consulting industry in China by the time you left. And that was an incredible and extremely fast growth. And not only about the so-called business volume, but more importantly about the impact that we're creating to the business community, right? And not only about the multinational companies, but we also began to work with a large number of local Chinese companies as well, as you know, right? So that experience, in my view, was highly precious, and also, thanks for your partnership. We built an incredible team, a team that is full of other seniors, principals, senior associates, business analysts, and so on. And it just, in general, it's very, very high quality, right? So in that process, I'd like to perhaps ask you a few more questions on China. Consulting, in my view, you're right, it doesn't really represent the entire business world, but it's a microcosm of the business, because consultants are given glimpses of what the business are doing, where business is wanting to go. And usually, especially for strategy consultants, they're involved in the quote unquote most strategic issues or most relevant issues, right? And so consultants have an ability or have the opportunity to see a lot. And so in your experience in doing consulting in China, comparing that with the experience that you had in other markets, what stood out to you that makes you feel, wow, China is really different? Not only about the context of the market of China, but it's the consulting approach, right, to China. What was the biggest difference or differences that you felt or you saw, and why was those important?
Yeah, good question, Ed. I would say what clearly stands out about, or stood out at the time in consulting in China, and I suspect it might be the same today, is that there's just a lot more need for future-oriented strategy work in China than anything I've seen anywhere else in the world. And it's because the industries are still rapidly developing, in some cases emerging still. There's always been a shortage. I believe that's probably true today of people or professionals in the China market and companies who are actually experienced in the art and application of strategy. And so there was always a much, much bigger need. And we saw that in the type of work that we actually did. I mean, just no comparison whatsoever. The other markets that I'd worked in, the United States and in Western Europe, as well as Korea, a lot of the industries were perhaps more established or not growing as fast. Companies had more of those capabilities. And so the consulting firms tended to do much more functional type of work. It started to become routinized to where it was procedures. In some cases, cynically, people would say, well, they're just following a template. In China, templates still needed to be created, and that was well into the future. And so the focus of the work was significantly more on discovery and insights around how markets or customers may evolve and how to find or create competitive advantage. And so for people who like that type of work, and that's clearly me, I think anyone who enjoys strategy consulting had to have found China to be the most interesting opportunity in recent decades. And I don't think there's been anything else that's been quite like it.
Yeah, it brought me to two points, right? The one point is about the importance of what we call thought leadership.
Right.
Thought leadership is a term that we borrowed from the first editor of Strategy and Business, which is the business magazine of Busan Hamilton. And he first coined the term thought leadership, and I thought that was really relevant for us in China, and therefore, we have intentionally generated and disseminated tremendous amount of thought leadership through our own observations of the work, our own practices, but disseminated and shared it with our clients. That really help us to build our brand, right? So thought leadership was critical. The other is, you're right, I think if we look across the world, because the different markets are in different life cycles, the nature of work and the size of the projects can be quite different. And therefore, in Busan at that time, the overriding thought from the firm was that, every partner should focus only on a handful of clients and then maximize the revenue per client. So to generate a good book of business for yourself and also the partners you work with. That was the notion. So the idea of quote unquote focus, meaning only work on a few clients, was the motto of the firm. But of course, in China, that philosophy really wouldn't work. First of all, the consulting market was nascent. There's not enough large clients that you can rely on that generate revenues in the kind of magnitude that the firm requires. Second is, even if you have those kind of clients, but if you only focus on one or two situations, you wouldn't have enough data to do the pattern recognition that you mentioned very early on,
right,
as a first principles of strategy, right? And so what we have decided to do, both as our own strategy, as well as where the market is telling us, was that we actually were out to do a lot of projects. And we didn't care what industry the client came from, because we knew we had the confidence that we can help the client to crack the problem, because we knew China better than anyone else, right? And we combined, of course, with enough industry knowledge so that we can really combine the geographic or the country knowledge, plus the industry knowledge to really help the client to crack it. And so that to me is also a very important element of consulting in China, which I still hold this philosophy even today, well over, 20 years after we started Boost, right?
Right.
Because this is still the right approach to consulting, because, it really helps the thought leadership as well. So tell me about how you generated so much capability in thought leadership. I still remember working with you on quite a number of, by now, epic thought leadership pieces, right? I remember we worked on an article that we called managing discontinuities in China. Managing discontinuities in China. That was a fascinating topic and also fascinating phenomenon.
No, I think that's absolutely right, Ed. The very best strategy consultants are people who see patterns and they can see them across industries. And it's the fewest of few who can actually do it, because the consulting industry model in so many markets has really turned into create the cookie cutter, find people who can replicate it, and it becomes a business. And there are some people who are attracted to that, and there is a market for it. But if you're looking for the very best thinkers, you can't get there that way, because there's only one learning curve, and the learning curve goes flat. And so to be a bona fide strategy consultant, and I see this now because I'm in a position where I hire consulting firms on occasion to explore problems. And the differences you see is, if you're looking for the people who can think laterally and see patterns, what you find is that they're never people who are specialized in just one thing. They're a different breed. And you know that very well as at Gao Feng, because that's been your lineage, right? You kind of grew up with roots of doing it, because that's what the market demanded, to help clients on some of the most complex problems, because the problem statements and the solutions never exist purely within one industry. You have to draw your knowledge. I found it personally very, very helpful in my current career, because in the multi-industrial companies I've been in, we also have divisions that work in completely different technologies and different markets, and the ability to see the patterns across them has become essential to me as well. And so, what does it take to get there? I would like to say that on thought leadership, that I thought about it in advance. The reality is I'd never done it before, but what I found, it was a necessity, because why should any client hire you if you don't have a point of view? And if the point of view is not well thought through with sufficient research and homework. And so until you actually go through that process, I don't know why a client would actually hire you. And so I would say we probably did it because we realized, first of all, that you had to do it if you wanted to actually have a client who would sign on to you. But in the process of doing it, you created a learning curve and repetitive learning curves that just made you that much more effective over time, right?
If you were to come to China again now, right? It's 2022 now, right? And you are serving multinationals who wanted to grow or to do whatever, to rethink about the strategy in China and so on. What would you tell them now, actually, after all this time?
It's funny. It's funny, Ed, because I've had the opportunity over the last decade in all of the companies that I've worked for to do some China-related strategy work. And what I would say is, I would say exactly the same things that we were saying in 2003. What has emerged is the context. China, I don't know what the latest figures are, but the total GDP of China is multiples the size of what it was in 2003. The complexity has only grown. The intensity of competition has magnified beyond anything that anyone would have imagined. But I'm confident that the basic principles have not changed. I'm also confident that you still have to understand the context. You still have to see the patterns. You still have to go through the process of some original thinking. And so if I were to go to China today, I would park much of what I'd learned in the past, and I would go up that same learning curve again. And I'm confident that I would be able to replicate that, but it would require a process of learning, right? Become the student and always learn.
At Booz, you are viewed as a people partner. Your team really liked you. You helped me to recruit a large number of new team members, and we had really a great team. Our team was extremely high quality. So in hindsight, what was the takeaways that you had about team building and the importance of having high quality teams in a professional environment?
Right. And you know, to add to that, Ed, if you look at a lot of the consultants that we recruited right out of the top Chinese universities, many of them went on to the top MBA programs in the world and then had significant professional careers after that, both in consulting
Sure.
and banking and other disciplines. I would say, you know, my takeaways were, I think, exactly where we started. Look for the right people, the right background and preparation, the right motivation for the role, which are intellectual curiosity, the willingness to be humble, but commit to a process of learning, the willingness to collaborate on teams and not take things personally when your idea doesn't rise to the top, the ability to work hard. I think working hard kind of goes without saying. But the people who were the most successful with us shared the very same traits that we do: intellectual curiosity, a passion for helping the client achieve their purpose, putting themselves into the shoes of the client and even role playing what it would be like to be in some of our client industries. And you know, the firm belief that the roles that we were playing would ultimately help our clients succeed, and taking that as the satisfaction for being in the profession in the first place. I think all those perennials are still the same today.
Yeah, that's right. You know, I think you know, while we talk about our team, we should also mention about the support we got from the Booz Allen leadership at that time, which is incredible. And of course, Dan Lewis was the president of the worldwide commercial business, and he was in a way the instigator of really helping us to rebuild China. And he also assigned initially Eric Spiegel,
Right.
who is a senior vice president in international, based in Tokyo at that time. And after he stepped down in the role, then assigned Steve Wheeler as the senior vice president for international. So Steve also worked with us and really was instrumental in helping us to accelerate the growth in China, and being the sort of the bridge between us and the senior team, the board at Booz Allen. And of course, we also get Dan's and Steve's support to form a China board, which consists of partners, representatives from every major industry sectors that we served. And they came to China every once or twice a year. And you know, we held these client visits, conferences, and so on. That was really very impactful. We wouldn't be able to do all that kind of stuff without the support of the firm. Right. So I think all the conditions were right at that time, and therefore we were able to do what we were able to do.
Right.
Ron, I've taken a lot of your time, so you know I'm conscious of the time, and I appreciate very much your time. But before you go, I want to ask you one last question, if I may. Perhaps it's not necessarily in business, but it could be also in business. What would be the most, or one or two most memorable events or incidents that you could remember during your days in China?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I mean, there's just so many. As I said, that it was the most formative period of my professional life. You know, I think, you know, I could cite many incidents or times that were just really memorable. Maybe the opening of the formal Shanghai office, where we had members of the press, friends and former associates, all of our new colleagues, when we made the move from the Jinmao Tower to the new office in Xintiandi, one corporate office. I thought that was it was a major turning point, because it signaled the coming out of Booz Allen in China, and it was huge. And you know, there were many similar events to follow: the opening of the Beijing office, the opening and expansion in Hong Kong. But I have to say that really marked a major turning point for me, and it was just a fantastic memory.
That's fantastic. I also remembered you, me, and Kevin Ma went to Ningbo to visit.
That was the second one I was going to mention. And I remember I was taking photographs the whole day of this place I'd never heard of, small city of 7 million, and the advanced infrastructure and what was going on with construction. And I was completely blown away by what was going on. I mean, it wasn't Shanghai.
If you go back to Ningbo today, you wouldn't even recognize it.
It's just amazing. And that the same pattern would repeat. Eventually, I stopped looking like the new guy to China, and I stopped taking all these photos, or I didn't want you guys to see me doing it, because everywhere we went, it was the same story, right? It was the rise of China in a way that would have been impossible to understand without actually seeing it.
But probably, my own observations, on that trip, but also with numerous other similar trips was, when we went to talk to people like Ningbo Bird at that time, who was an aspiring handset maker, from an international standard standpoint at that time, they were nobody. They were just a copycat and so on. But you can tell by the questions that the manager asked and the curiosity that they have and the ambitions that they want to catch up and to learn was just incredible. Like you can feel that urge of wanting to make progress.
A thirst for knowledge, a thirst for achievement, and a passion to do it and to take risk, right?
Yeah. And that all came out in a very genuine manner. It's not like, they want to cheat, they want to take a shortcut and so on.
Right.
It's just genuinely, how could we be better, right?
It's this infectious enthusiasm that when you see it, you kind of get absorbed into the conversation, into the passions of the client. And I think that's what the very best strategy consultants do, is you get into the role, you become one with your client over time. And that's where you ultimately can align and do your best work.
That's great, Ron. Good. Well, it's been a great conversation, Ron, as always.
Good to catch up, Ed. Always a pleasure. I think you're doing great things with Gao Feng, kind of continuing or extending the original vision and mission that we had with Booz. And, it's almost 20 years later, but it continues. It's a pleasure watching your continued growth and achievements.
Yeah, that's the consulting heritage. We like to carry the torch, because otherwise that torch would be gone somehow.
Exactly.
Right? So I'm still carrying the torch. All right. Thanks a lot, Ron.
Yep.
Nice talking to you.
Bye,
Thanks
Ed.
for your time. Goodbye.